I think one of the important things for me is just acknowledging how difficult it is for people to actually walk in the door, to put their hand up for help, and also to identify that the service is here. That's easier for them now than it was some years ago, but just acknowledging the difficulties for a start and the courage that it takes in being able to do that. Validating their journey, I think is really important. So that idea of bearing witness and actually sitting with the pain and the difficulties that people have been through. But I think then moving past that and really looking at why people are putting themselves through this. What is it they're looking for in their lives? What is it that they want to be different? So it's that backwards, forwards, past, present, future movement that I find really important to sustain in all my counselling sessions.
Really paying attention to the relationship itself, because that's the ground or where trust and safety develops for someone to be more vulnerable and start opening up and exploring their trauma. So creating a space that's just incredibly respectful and safe and that pays attention to the relationship and how the relationship is going, and the client's experience of the counselling process and what they need and what's supportive for them, what's helpful for them, what's not. And being always invitational and giving many choices, to me, is very important, so that, you know, survivors of sexual assault often have never had choice in their history. So giving permission and choice and invitational language is another thing that's important, just in the process.
Do not ever stop focusing on safety. So safety in relationships, undertaking safety contracts with the men, particularly if there are issues or concerns around suicidality or self-harm or substance abuse. Where are places that they find that they feel safe, if there are any, or people with whom they feel safe. So the conversation around safety is never not attended to. It's a constant. So that's the first area. The second area is around trust. It's because the issues of trust have been, you know, their relationships with trust have been disrupted because of the early abuse. So continuing to have conversations about how to not be vigilant in the therapeutic process, or to be even hyper-vigilant in the therapeutic process. What is it going to be required for them to trust themselves, but also to trust the therapeutic process? Because I think men who've been abused, they come to therapy with hope that things are ultimately going to be different, but they also come with terror of actually engaging in this process in the first place. It's terrifying to talk about these sorts of things. The last area is intimacy. And we know that the intimacy issues are really significant with anybody who's been abused as a child, sexually abused as a child. But what it does as a therapist is, I know that I need to be absolutely vigilant around boundaries. They need to be boundaries that are consistent, that are safe, that are really authentic, both at a cognitive, emotional and physical level.
On one occasion I did find what was really helpful for a man who came in, and he would just found it quite difficult sitting down, and he was obviously really quite anxious about walking into this building, coming into my office and sitting down in front of a woman. You know, he thought I was going, I mean, he couldn't have sat down in front of a man to do the work. He told me he couldn't. But the thought of me asking him questions just terrified him. So I let him know, I don't expect you to tell me anything. There's no expectation. If you want to, of course, I can hear that. And if you want to leave after 10 minutes or 20 minutes, that's fine with me. And I invited him to think about something we could talk about that felt safe. And he wanted to talk about his dog. So we spent quite a lot of time talking about his dog. And that was his safety. For future sessions, if he was struggling, he would say, I'd like to talk about my dog now. So I just found that worked really well. Finding a safe issue to discuss, particularly, you know, if I'm aware too, as therapists, we're always aware of, we pick up cues, how people sit, how they move, facial expressions, whatever, I might gently ask, do you need to talk about something safe now? So that's something I found really useful with this particular guy. I think also being honest as well. There was one particular guy who would come in every week and he would talk about the same thing, which is okay, and I noticed that he was clenching his teeth. So being honest about what I noticed and asking him what he thought about that. And then he said, well, that's my defence, so that's how I stop myself from talking to you. So, we talked about, well, is it useful? Do you really want to talk? How might we do it? Do you want me to ask you if I notice that you're doing it? So just being honest about, what we actually see is happening in the room, I think, rather than hoping he will gradually want to talk, or pretending that he's not grinding his teeth because it's obvious to me. And sometimes that can be quite subtle too. So that was some experiences. When I say experiences, I guess there were some strategies that helped me, and then gave him the opportunity to be more aware of how he was protecting himself.
Although I do have a framework that I work towards, and I guess that's influenced largely by Judith Herman and Babette Rothschild in looking at that 3-phase therapeutic approach where you prioritise safety and stability. So one of the first things I do, and then reinforce that in each session, is where the client's sitting in terms of their safety. So really, as Babette Rothschild says, putting the brakes on. So using those kind of metaphors I think are really helpful for the fellows as well.
Shame is an enormous burden for people who've suffered sexual abuse, men and women. It's the burden that I think the responsibility they carry inflicted upon self, but based on the isolation that comes from not being able to talk about it, the feeling of responsibility, and I think the concept of shame can be understood, but I think it's a key to us needing to be able to explain to our clients and go back and explain the processes that have happened to them, which I certainly do in my work, and particularly with men, to help them understand what has happened to them and why, so that in fact you can help break down that idea of personal responsibility and enormous shame. Many people believe they've got a sign on their heads. I was an abused person, or look at me, I'm abused, and they honestly believe that. Many clients, women and men, say that to me. And it's a terrible burden to carry. I think society has placed the elements of society that have talked about sex, the unspokenness, the effects of religion, the effects of people's discomfort about matters sexual, have allowed people to develop an enormous sense of shame in their lives, which it's our responsibility, I think, to help break down and question and allow people to hear themselves think those things through as they come to therapy.
The whole issue around shame, that's a big kind of guiding kind of concept for me, and a lot of people that I work with, and I can reflect on my own journey about this as well, come in with an idea that my trauma and what happened to me is my fault and it's about me and I'm abnormal, I'm stuffed up, and there's a real sense of self-pathology. And often what's missing is a wider lens of understanding what was happening in the environment, what was too much or too little in the environment that contributed to someone's experience of self-blame or shame or disempowerment. So I kind of consider it a paradigm shift from an individualist model to a relational model, where we start to understand that our experience is always in relationship to the context around us. And if I feel shame, it's because there's a lack of reception and support in the field that's contributed to that shame. So shame is not a feeling about me, It's a feeling that tells me that there's been a lack of support and connection in the environment that supported me to feel more loved, more grounded, more safe, more secure. So I find that that's helping people move from the individualist, my shame is just about me and what's missing and lacking in me, to my shame is telling me what's been missed out in my environment. I found that's been very healing for many men, is to make that shift, to contextualise their symptoms as normal responses to an abnormal situation, if you like.
Our guys, they almost all of them have struggles with shame. You know, if the picture that I painted before of, you know, 20 or 30 or 40 years of carrying a whole bunch of pain and grief and PTSD symptoms and all the impacts that have on your relationships and all the negative feedback you've got, plus your own sense of self-loathing and blaming yourself for the worst thing that ever happened to you, having someone see you not as your problem, but as a human being who is amazing for having survived this long, for coming and talking to us about the worst thing that ever happened to you, and they're coming and talking to us, and they keep coming back to talk about the worst thing that ever happened to them. That's respect. Like, you just have to be able to look at these guys and go, my God, what an amazing human being. And to think that and feel it and to be able to portray it, really, really important to make these clients feel safe.